G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here with some very dag into the outsiders. A kick to the camera,
late last
followed
year,
by First Moondog.
Lint. This stuff percolates through our society from a distance, so they don't have to be here physically. It's the impact they have on the way we conduct our lives.
Isn't that the thing though, Antonin? We take precautions, our security services appear to be effective. Is there a need for the rest of us to be in a state of agitation and panic?
Look, I think the context of all of it, I've been having my bag searched since 2001, so I don't think that's a contemporary development. The context for all of this is leadership. Well, Roger, the context of all of this is Abbott's leadership difficulties in February. No, the context, national security works for Tony Abbott, and does it work for John Howard? I don't dismiss the threat of these, terrorists any more than Malcolm Turnbull did in what I thought were his very sensible remarks on Tuesday, whatever night he made them, Tuesday or Wednesday night, that would have been entirely mainstream for the Liberal Party at one time. But we now have this over-the-top rhetoric, and it's all about whipping up support for a Prime Minister who doesn't seem to be able to keep the support of his colleagues in the Cabinet or to run the Cabinet process in a way that doesn't break out in problems because issues haven't been canvassed in the Cabinet, which is the appropriate place to be doing this, not constantly out with the media. And I think, we've seen Barnaby Joyce come out this week. We've seen Malcolm Turnbull make some remarks that in the context of Abbott's, incapacity to get out of his own leadership difficulties in the polls, not although with, members of his party room, he's enjoying much more support. The fundamental Cabinet processes seem to me to be the problem. And he is the one who, as Prime Minister, could address those. And then, we wouldn't have to be wondering about who's positioning or what, because we actually have a proper and functioning Cabinet process.
I mean, is there a central point of this, Wendy, that if we're worried about the threat of the terror, that the sort of rhetoric we're getting actually exacerbates that rather than makes it go away?
Well, I think that's absolutely right, and it's a feedback loop, isn't it? We get worried, the laws become more draconian. We complain about how draconian the laws are. That's the loop. But I actually think Malcolm Turnbull was perhaps not positioning himself to run for the leadership, but perhaps positioning himself back within the law community for his job after he leaves politics, because he does have a long and celebrated career as a lawyer, and the things that he was saying in that address were all about the rule of law and
Such a forward thinker.
Yes, exactly. What is acceptable overseas, and just to restate those facts. So I don't, if you're a lawyer, that's the sort of speech you should give. If you're a doctor, it's the same sort of speech that you should give about restrictions on reporting on Manus Island. It goes back to your profession.
Well, I think we can all agree on one thing, and that's that Malcolm Turnbull is a congenital lawyer.
Thank you.
It's a very fine line, Roger. Very fine line. The other thing to sort of make to raise some eyebrows was of course Barnaby this week, and you have to feel for Barnaby Joyce, I think, Wendy. I mean, he was.
Oh, bugger Barnaby.
No, he's dudded seriously there, I think.
Oh, he has been dudded, but Tony Windsor came out and said, well, Barnaby has done nothing to stop this big coal mine. Job. Yeah, where, people were saying, well, where were the rallies that he called? Where were the signs that he stood in front of? Where were the petitions? So...
yes, I mean, there's another question here, Roger. I mean, do they seriously think that they will be selling thermal coal in 30 years' time, which is the intention of this mine?
What do you imagine will be running furnaces, Jonathan?
Well, I suspect we will be in a post-furnace era by that point.
Powered by good intentions and imagination.
No, your solar power, that kind of thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd be quite prepared to have a sort of Paul Ehrlich-style bet with you that 30 years from now we're selling more coal than we're doing now.
Antonin, is that a punch you'd like to take?
Look, it's not my expertise, but I do think it does reveal tensions between agriculture and mining very much. And, the Nationals are in a very difficult place on this. They're at visceral threat from independence as as the economic realities of these kinds of developments it entice people to sell and bring developments on. State governments want to bring developments on because they've got a revenue problem. These are really, really wicked choices to be made. I go back to the cabinet process point that Joyce was raising real questions about how well that process worked. He's still contesting the advice, despite the fact that that Greg Hunt had, despite the fact that this should have been sorted out in the cabinet room.
He does seem to be burdened by care just now, our Barnaby, but
I think it gets back again to the optics that I was talking about earlier, Jonathan. I mean, the optics about wind farms and turbines and coal mines. These are what voters see. These are the things that we see that are easy to see.
thank you to all. And look, much more we could say, but we can't because time is against us. Wendy Harmer, author and commentator, joins you. Anne Tiernan, professor of the School of Government and International Relations at Griffith University. Roger Franklin, he's editor of Quadrant Online. I have some saddening news that First Dog on the Moon, his guide to modern living. We won't have one this week, I'm afraid. There is an illness in the dog family that has precluded that appearance. It's coming up to 10 o'clock. That means it's it for Sunday Extra.
Okay. Sad to hear about First Moon Dog having an illness in the family, but that does explain why there was no First Moon Dog this week. I'll just open that door and let you share the fire. So, Malcolm Turnbull did get up and say a few sensible things. He also did imply that Tony Abbott has been doing what I've been accusing him of for months, years, which is to say, whipping up anti-Muslim feeling, terrorist paranoia for internecine political purposes, so that he can look like he's a strong Prime Minister. He wants to be more Australian than an Akubra hat, which, as from this week, Akubra hats are going to be made out of European rabbits because the Australian rabbit farmers, there are such things as Australians who farm rabbits for a living, due to a rabbit Calasi virus or calcivirus, which, well, it almost annihilated the wild rabbit population there for a while, so they were no longer able to buy wild shot rabbits. So, there were Australian rabbit farmers, but they can't produce a rabbit skin as cheaply as the European rabbit farmers can fly them out from Europe or ship them to Australia, however they bloody get here. So your Australian Akubra hats that are going all around the world are going to be made out of European rabbit skins, not Australian ferals or farmed rabbits. So yeah, somehow, if an Akubra hat is an iconic hallmark of Australian-ness, Tony Abbott wants to be more Australian than an Akubra hat. But considering that he was born in England, which means that he's come out to Australia and he's never quite fitted into the Australian landscape or environment, because Tony Abbott wasn't bred in Australia. He's not the result of an Australian swimming race for sperms to try and get to an egg and then be considered for entry through the cell wall, cell membrane. It's really funny, they take these electron micro photography videos of 100 sperms swimming up to an egg, and when they get there they find there's already 50 sperms got their head up against the egg and none of them can get in. It's only when one comes up that's actually got the right package of telomeres to show to the egg's defences to say, I've got all of these recessives and all of these dominants, and let me in and I'll help you build a baby that looks like thus and acts like such. And suddenly that one, the 137th sperm to get there, straight in. So Tony Abbott, the result of an English swimming race, born in London, transplanted to Australia. He's grown up being hassled in Australia as a Pommie. And as they said on an earlier program, how do you know when it's a British jet airliner that lands? The answer is the engine shut down and the whining keeps going. So that's the sort of treatment that Tony Abbott would have received as a little kid. Then he's been a Catholic, expensive boarding school type, because that's what St Ignatius Riverview was back in the day. I don't know whether they have borders there any longer. I know they've been featuring fairly heavily in the committee or the Royal Commission into sexual assault in institutions. There was quite a few from St Ignatius Riverview who were bullied. So I guess there are, people who were too stupid to notice the bullying and the sexual assault. There were the people who were the bullies and the sexual assaulters. And there were the people who were the victims. Well, we've heard from the victims, and Tony Abbott's a football bully who then went to England, to Oxford. And when he was in Oxford, he somehow got given a law degree because he had a boxing blue. I think that's the colour of his blazer. He boxed for Oxford. So he's a pugilist. He's a head puncher with a law degree. How the hell they gave him a law degree when he has no faint grasp of how the law works? The separation of powers, fundamental implied rights like, the right to free speech, free thought, freedom of association, freedom of movement, habeas corpus, the assumption of being innocent. Really funny that since the Liberal National Party took over in Australia, lots and lots of state jurisdictions have changed their attitude in line with the federal attitude on terrorist prosecutions, which is that anybody who doesn't answer questions is no longer presumed to be innocent, they are presumed to be guilty. Yet when you ask a politician a question that they don't want to answer, they just have no comment. In future, I'd like everybody to understand that when a politician says no comment, what that translates as guilty as charged. Whatever you charge them with, if they say no comment, it means they're guilty, because that is how the politicians have cooked the books on the legislature, such that that's how the court regards the citizenry. If they take somebody to court, charge them with something, ask them a question, and the person says, I have nothing to say, once upon a time that meant they had nothing to say, and it was up to the prosecution to prove their case on the evidence of the facts of the case, of the matter before the court. No, not in Tony Abbott's putrid version of Australia. In Tony Abbott's putrid version of Australia, we don't even need courts. We just have to have a minister who has a suspicion that somebody needs to be stripped of their citizenship because that'll be in the Australian national interest. I don't know what his karma's going to be, but I look forward to rolling around the floor laughing when it hits him. Because karmic payback, feedback loops on the cosmic scoreboard effect always wins in the end. It always wins in the end. And Tony Abbott is one of these people who is just intelligent enough to notice that most of the people he meets are less intelligent than him, because he's got above average intelligence, but he's not intelligent enough to understand that there are people who are smarter than him, and might is not always right. You can't force people to do the right thing. They have to choose to do the right thing. So he can't force people to live in his fantasy parallel universe, and we can't force him to live in a free democracy. Sooner or later, global warming and extreme weather events will make his crops fail, and then the peasants will revolt and they will defenestrate the king. It's what happens. Crop failure, defenestration of the government. Global warming will bring Tony Abbott undone. Sadly, it's going to bring the rest of us undone as well, but Australia voted for him. Everybody's obeying him. You get what you pay for. How many hamburgers did the Royal Air Force cook in 1943 because they voted for Hitler? Every people always gets the government they deserve. The Americans agreed to do whatever George W. Bush said, even though he lost the friggin' election. He didn't get elected. Hitler got elected. George W. Bush was appointed by a court injunction which stopped counting the votes because continued counting may prejudice the applicant's claim to have won. just desserts. Just desserts. That's why America doesn't work as a world power anymore, because they follow George W. Australia's not much of a world democracy anymore because we follow Tony of the Abbottonians. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Still bloody cold outside. Ciao.